Hello, and welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. This is episode 81, The Loss of Criticism and Unspeakable Crisis. These are a series of ruminations we do once a week. We have a preview that we have on Wednesday evenings at 10:30, and then we have our program that we do at this time on every Sunday morning. So it's me, Bruce Gemmel. I'm a kind of a draftsman and a researcher. And we have Julie, who's a painter and a writer, and our international correspondent, Penguil. Penguil is off again. I think she's headed to Central Asia to do a piece, and look forward to her investigations. Anyway, this is our topic, the unspeakable crisis of the loss of criticism. Now, what do I mean by that? Criticism is not lost. Criticism is kind of under attack. And in itself, it may seem very kind of innocent or kind of maybe not that big a deal. But one of the things I think it is a cornerstone of one of the fundamental principles by which our society has achieved the ability to express genius in ways that have not existed in previous times. So what happens is we spoke often about the relationship between technique and reason, mostly kind of technique and science, and how by a result of this, we've taken our desires and our actions and been able to kind of, subject them to a kind of rigor that previously was never around. And as a result, we were able to kind of be able to get to situations and kind of understand and appreciate situations that not only we were able to kind of tackle some kind of technically profound challenges, also start to realize that some of our previous what we call unbreakable bonds between technique and other things were actually incredibly destructive and harmful. I think one of the things that we came to understand is, let me give you an example. The fact that sometimes technique was an activity were linked to superstitions or religions or kind of faith-based actions. And I'm not by saying that science is not in somewhat engaged in faith to a degree as well, but in a way in which we understood that there were no ways to kind of reason if we ever were capable of having a deeper understanding of that which we believed. So I think when superstition and religion as an extension of that superstition basically made propositions or made speculations, there was no way to really test the value of these speculations to even find out if there's even any basic kind of truth or falsity. A good example was the desecration and destruction of animals and humans for a greater natural cause. The idea of kind of like sacrificing virgins or sacrificing children or sacrificing people to the gods in order to appease them, in order for certain things to take place. These things were just absolutely reprehensible. We got to understand now that they were not only worthless, they were selfish, they were arrogant, they were kind of like corrupt. But again, this is one of the benefits that comes with the changing of times and the connection of concepts to other concepts that broaden their capacity. So with that said, let me return back to what I mean by hi loved one, put your face in there. That's Julie.
Hello, I'll be right back. I'm moving your sneakers and getting my chair.
Thank you, Pete. So as a result of that, I think one of the things that we've been able to do is kind of like, why is criticism important? Now, criticism is one of the devices that allows for the value and assessment of the technological enterprise, the scientific enterprise. So that correlation that we've made by kind of taking activities and utility, right, and reasoning them and technique through reason and kind of like reason-based speculation, we've been able to kind of uncover certain things that were never possible in any other ways. I mean, I'll give you an example. In certain times, we might have believed that a certain sword had power simply because it had basically absorbed the energy of one's enemies. We were never capable of proving that. We're never capable of kind of proving that that was anything until we realized it was wrong. So we realized that basically what made us capable of making better swords was a better understanding of metallurgy and a better understanding of kind of forging techniques. These kings were capable of being done by basically understanding the nature of chemistry and the understanding of kind of like of forges and pressure and things like this. So we were able to understand how to make swords that were lighter and more efficient and better equipped for fighting. So in fact, this idea that we were somehow able to kind of understand these previous things was absurd, and that now we know, we've come to understand that. So anyway, the attack on criticism has basically become one of those things that, as we said before, it's an indictment of an unhealthy circumstance within our society. And it's one of those things that we have to be wary of, because if we get to a situation where we kind of undermine criticism to the point where it's no longer effective, then we basically start to undermine that entire enterprise. And then somehow we might, and given the feral tribal nature of which I see, this idea of retrogression or kind of retrograde activity towards things of a more tribal or feral nature moves us away from the progress that we've been able to make, and that's something we want to avoid. Anyway, with that introduction, I'll let Julie say a few introductory words, and I'll go back to the piece that I started with.
Should I do This Week in Julie first?
Let's do This Week in Julie, and I'll start with this when we get back to it. So, what's new in This Week in Julie? Oh, I love this drawing.
Quite a bit.
Absolutely love this drawing.
Thank you.
And we're almost done with it. So
if you'd be kind enough to hold up my drawing.
And again, anyone who knows how to split the screen or be able to kind of allow us to put these things up here so we can photograph them and have them on the screen, we'd love to hear how, because
it's better not to have to hold them up.
It is. I mean, this is just a really crude way to kind of illustrate it. It would be so much nicer if we could actually kind of take that and have the cursor and be able to move across it.
Have it up there the whole time.
Exactly. I
mean, we've asked a lot of so-called experts in video and film production. They don't even know.
Well, actually, was Stephen at BronxNet was actually very helpful.
No.
So I mean, he's the one person who's kind of been able to kind of help us technically.
No, let's not get into that. But I mean, he was great and he showed us. He was absolutely instrumental.
Anyway, so where are we here, Pete?
Yes. Okay. We are, and the title of my drawing, this drawing that you see here, is Nightfall of Grondwittloof. And I know it sounds like an elvish Middle Earth term or something from The Hobbit. Oh, no, not Julie Andrews. No, it sounds much more J.R.R. Tolkien. It sounds like Gandalf, but it is actually a Belgian word, and it is the correct word, Grondwittloof, or white gold. And white gold is the name for the Queen of Belgian endives, which this is, which you see here. You see the tap root, which is instrumental in the bizarre 2-year life cycle. That's in cultivation. In the wild, Grondwittloof has a 3 to 4 year, even stranger life cycle. So my point here is to emphasize a human-induced artificial night, and what will be here in this corner, you are asking, is a human-induced artificial day, which I have not done yet. I ran out of time at the Met. But what you are looking at, if you zoom in close, I think you'll see that's good. That's good. So what you are looking at here, right here, is a Chinese cloisonné object, which has a lot of creatures of the night, bats and fantastical chimera and dragons, pretty much all the creatures, real and fabled, which to us are also quite real. On this piece, it is basically a 2-lobed scroll piece that lifts up. I imagine there were actual scrolls inside, and I have taken the golden bat wings and lifted them off the face of the piece so it arcs coming up like this, and put a patch of very, very starry night sky all through here, because to go quickly in cultivation, if you've ever had the delicate, beautiful Belgian endive, which makes its own hors d'oeuvre cracker, It has almost a green apple scent. It's crisp, it's light. It's also a powerhouse of antioxidants, but it doesn't have any chlorophyll, almost none, because it is denied the ability in its second forced year of growth to photosynthesize. So when it's planted outdoors in the ground, it shoots out big, thank you, P, big dark green leaves, grows as any other plant might. Obviously, it's quite photosynthetic. But then all of its leaves are beheaded. They chop off all the heads of all of the plants and harvest, and they throw them out and harvest only the tap roots, which actually look like curled old gnomes
Like a
or elves.
ginseng.
It does look like a ginseng, yeah. So, and here is our tea's tea in jasmine.
Thank you, Tea's Tea.
Thank you, Tea's Tea, our sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, so these very very curled, very hoary tap roots are taken in and placed in these long, shallow wooden stretchers and covered over with blanket sheets or metal, blocking out any light, and they are then forcibly resprouted in the blackness, in the dark. So it is an artificial human-induced night, a midnight, the blackest and the darkest, of the azure nights. And they grow pale white with just a hint of green or yellow at the tip. And that's what is eaten. And that's in the second year. So there you have it.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting kind of situation because it's a kind of an artificially created circumstance. I mean, I think that some of the fascinating, explorations into artificial endeavors of nature are kind of really kind of like they have a macabre character. They have a kind of like really bizarre nature. I kind of love those type of activities. I mean, I'd eaten endive my whole life. Not my whole life, because not something that
you were not raised on endive.
Never would have met. Where I grew up in Entropy, that never would have been something we would have ever seen. In fact, I love telling the story about the fact that the first time my mother heard about poached salmon, she thought it had been stolen. Because that was to her, that's what poaching was.
It's true.
Yeah.
The first, I will contrast this, since there's always quick time for a food story. In stark contrast to Bruce's absurd but absolutely true and rather heartbreaking experience with a lack of good food. My first experience with the Belgian endive was at a local cocktail party, and in it was served dried, cured, smoked breast of duck, fresh figs, caramelized pecans, and Roquefort. And that was my first experience with it, which is vastly different from.
Well, I mean, you had it when you were kind of 7, 8 years old. I had it when I think the first time I had endive, I was like 5. I think the first time I had endive, I was like 24.
Because you chose to seek it out.
Well, it just kind of you see, once I actually kind of found myself in a kind of in an environment that was to my likings, I kind of found all these things that I had never really kind of seen anywhere before,
And now you have me.
Exactly. Okay, so
thank you. I will put this safely away, and we can launch into our topic.
Yeah. So I think I've said in the past how I feel that the unbreakable bond that exists in terms of criticism is that which what I would call observation and kind of like skepticism. I believe that there is someone who I would call the critic and someone who I would call, let's say, the artist. So the artist is the person who receives the observations by way of the critic. And these are the things that I think has to come to bear in terms of this endeavor. So I think that there are values in the kind of fundamental unbreakable bond. And I think that we'll go more into what the loss of criticism it's not lost, but it's something that could be lost. And one of the reasons why we chose a drawing of Diderot was like Diderot in his encyclopedia was there to make people aware of the fact that there were certain things that needed to be retained. We've talked often about the fact that Diderot to us was that individual who most exemplified that almost vanitas attitude towards enlightenment. That these things that we have engaged and understood are incredibly fragile. And I find the parallel to this time very unnerving. I think that we look at our gadgets and our goblins and we kind of think to ourselves as kind of like unassailable and kind of uncorruptible, and therefore we take for granted this civilization and we mock it, even kind of deride it, and don't realize how essential it is. And then I hope that we're smart enough to realize, but I wonder, that we don't want to lose it. And we can have it slip away. And it's being attacked and it's basically being carved out. I look at society a lot of times and it almost looks like people who are setting fire inside their own house.
It does.
You know.
It does.
Anyway, so with that, you know, we understand that fundamental relationship between, let's call it observation and skepticism, or kind of a skeptical aspect of reason. I'll go more into kind of like my idea of the project of skepticism as I kind of understand it from Hume. But this is take that for what it is right now. So, Pete, tell us where we are in terms of what are some things you want to talk about.
Yes, thank you. I'd like a sip of tea.
Have a sip of tea. Thank you, Tea's Tea, our sponsor.
Thank you.
Actually, we've got a whole bunch of
new people.
Oh yeah, true. But I was saying we got a whole bunch of mint tea, and with the coming summer months, you know, there's nothing more refreshing than a chilled mint tea from Tea's Tea.
Yes, a Tea's Tea.
The mint tea chilled,
which is organic,
is incredibly
unsweetened.
Bright. Oh yeah, but it's incredibly bright and refreshing for a hot summer day.
That it is.
Yeah.
Pete.
Anyway, so
okay, let us launch. I'm going to give a really stirring example of criticism in the sciences. Now, what is key here is there has been an enormous amount of, how shall I say, unreplicable scientific published research, unfortunately. There's an enormous pressure, and it's not all the scientists' fault. Some are just very unscrupulous. The majority of people in science are doing a phenomenal job under very adverse circumstances, without any funding, without any support from the government, without any support from their institutions. So I'm not in any way maligning scientists, but in every field, there are those very scandalous things that really take down a lot of research, papers that are oft cited, and this was a very well cited paper, meaning a lot of people referred to it. Unfortunately, it was incorrect in a lot of fundamental ways. Many times the authors know it's incorrect and they are publishing, how should I say, information that is either plagiarized, generated by artificial intelligence, which is a huge problem, or in this case, incorrect in a lot of ways. And I will be quite specific as I talk about key criticism in science of unreplicable, fallacious, unsound research studies. And I'm talking about studies that are published in peer-reviewed academic journals. This happens more often than you would like to think. In this case, we are talking about a huge blow-up, a controversy in what's called fear extinction studies.
Oh, I remember this.
Yes, yes. In fact, this is the subject of my painting that I am doing now.
Let me just say one thing quickly.
Sure,
one of the things that I think maybe people are unaware of is that there has been a crisis of reproducibility or substantiability has been going on pretty much since the 1970s.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I find is something that people need to understand and appreciate is one of the things that happens in science is science kind of moves very slowly. And it kind of seems to kind of be good that it does that.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is a speculation, which we all need to love and appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
heads in a certain direction, but over time only accumulates
Mm-hmm.
value as it passes the test of time, because other things can basically be put in its way
And
it can
built
basically
upon
and
it.
be built exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the, and then this is one of the, again, one of the fundamental aspects of the relationship between technique, activities, ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and that which it goes against in terms
Mm-hmm.
of reason and science.
I agree.
And there is a crisis
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of known within the scientific community, but not really known within the popular environment.
Well, that's why I'm bringing it up.
I know.
Okay.
But I wanted to get people
Oh, no,
aware of the
no,
fact that
I
this is
think
not something we're, saying and making up.
we're
It's
not.
something that's
It's
basically been going on. It is very much understood and appreciated.
Oh yeah, I mean,
right.
There was a huge experiment in the Arctic
and exploited by people of
Yeah.
various kind of like, nefarious natures.
Okay. That's true.
Okay.
There was a huge experiment in the Arctic, and it turns out it was supposed to be like an 8-week, 8 to 12-week experiment. And the scientists who did it basically forged all of the data, used the same diagrams over and over of plants that couldn't possibly grow that fast. I'll get into this in another episode. And it turns out they were there for 4 days, left and went on vacation in the tropics. And in fact, they were not even there running this experiment. They published it. It was a huge thing. Anyway, I'd like to talk specifically about this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to name names because these people are known.
Should we?
Yes, because it's
if you
part
want
of the
to.
experience.
Right,
Yes,
okay,
I do.
okay.
I want to be.
I don't want us to get in trouble.
We aren't. This is published. This is
Okay,
very well known. I'm not
Right.
coming up with this. This isn't us.
No, I'm not saying that, but
You're
you know
right.
how people are. Remember, there was that woman who I think was at Harvard she was studying truth, and it turns out she was like the most dishonest
She
person.
had plagiarized
everything she ever
every
did.
word that she ever wrote, and I mean these were popular psychology books on truth.
But she sued everyone.
Yes.
Anybody
she actually
who even
didn't win anything. But
no, but the point is, the idea is
anyway,
people that disreputable are dangerous.
Okay,
And
I
go
would
ahead.
agree. I'd like to start because
Mhm.
we're running out of time.
I see that.
I haven't really said anything yet. Okay, so
That can never be true of anything you say.
thank you. Okay, so accepting spurious, flawed, specious, or shoddily acquired information because you wish it to be true, rather than due to this information's inherent merit, core truths, or empirical data, logical content, or reasoned infrastructure. That's not real science. That's pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And again, pseudoscience is not science.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Just want to launch into this if
Mhm.
you don't mind. Okay. So the deeply flawed published research paper was from 2010, and it was by one Daniela Schiller and Company. It was published. It's a neuroscience paper. She still is, I think, a neurobiologist. And it was on fear extinction, which in a nutshell is the ability of the human mind to basically banish horrible experiences, fears, phobias, bad experiences, unpleasant, harmful memories, PTSD. It would be wonderful if this were true. And she claimed, and her paper was cited over and over, meaning other people were building their research on this paper, which was not at all true. So what is very interesting here is this critique of unreplicable fear extinction studies was from internal rather than external skeptics.
Mhm.
And this I have to point out. These were people in her field who found the flaws in her work. Not a witch hunt. This was not at all. This was a bona fide thing of other neuroscientists, other neurobiologists saying, hey, we are running her same experiments and they are not showing the results at all that she had actually shown. Um, so these were
Which is the
irreproducible.
way it's supposed to work. That's a healthy expression
Yes,
of the
yes,
system, is that
yes. Okay,
people
yeah.
are skeptical
Mhm.
and basically will have to go and say,
Yeah,
hey, show me
yeah,
let me see if I can make
yeah.
this
That's what
work.
I'm going to
Right,
explain here,
right,
P,
right.
if I may. So, so when you have irreproducible outcomes, meaning a paper where none of the experiments or most of them cannot show the results that were shown, that is very bad. There were flawed data sets and most egregious flawed brain mapping, meaning, and this is really, 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 really key. Um, in 2018, Dr. M. Angels Falaria and team published a massive meta analysis, which is when you call numerous, very reputable studies, you analyze them and you find and publish the commonalities, okay? Of human MRI studies and scans wherein the ostensibly well mapped brain circuitry from Schiller's original flawed 2010 study was completely wrong. So, fear extinction, according to the Schiller work, was supposed to happen in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the right hemisphere of the amygdala. So, the area of the brain, the amygdala, for those of you who are unfamiliar, processes fear, anxiety, and aggression. And there, it showed that this area lacked the consistent activities across the previously published studies, meaning this was not right at all. And one of the other main flaws that was found by a Dr. Johan and Lundstrom and colleagues, who's obviously Swedish, in 2018 directly criticized the Schiller paper on fear extinction because there were major issues with animal and translational models, which is when you run experiments in experimental animals and it doesn't correlate with how the human body, brain, or physiology or behaviors work. So prior extinction retention deficits failed to hold up across the entire site. So that is basically what I am talking about. And the title of my painting, then I will end with that, is Gilded Terrors of a Court Jester. I won't go into it now, but key is the word gilding in the title of my painting refers to a failed translational animal human model. And that's what I would like to say about that. So
There was an Austrian theoretical physicist named Wolfgang Pauli who basically had a phrase where he said, it's not even wrong. And by that you mean there's something foundationally incorrect about the speculation.
Yeah,
and
that's what this is.
Why is this important? It's important because if this can happen in the hard sciences,
yes,
right? Imagine what happens in the softer sciences, and even in that aspect that borders on the humanities, or as they say on the Big Bang,
Oh, the
the
humanities.
humanities,
We
right?
had to
Now,
do that
I love that.
together.
But again, I mean, I'm an architect, and I'm a researcher, and I'm a draftsman. Julie's an artist and a writer. But so we understand and appreciate our artist friends, and we
Of
also,
course we do.
and but we also understand the rigor that sometimes
Is
is lacking, and also
Yes.
exploited that it's lacking.
Yeah.
So again, my concern is, especially with the humanities, is a lot of these things that take place in terms of these speculations, because of the desire emotionally for
they
certain
wish
results,
it to be
they
true.
wish
That's
it to
what
be true.
That's what I
So
said.
there's an emotional link with no substantiation. Now, one of the things that I think we'll be talking about in a while is kind of like, Hume's project of skepticism. And Hume was very clear in the fact that he believes the desires and the passions are what rule us. They're what move us. They're the impulses that allow us to activity. However, the benefit is the utility by which we find the things that we derive from these things are to our benefit. And one of the things that distinctly is helpful is reason. And that reason, unlike in Star Trek, where the Vulcans basically kind of like used logic to bring themselves out of being these kind of like, tribal feral people, logic in itself is not
separated them from the Romulans.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Logic and reason itself is not a motivator. It is simply a tool by which you can basically take your passions and your desires and temper them to the point where you can kind of understand the value of their utility, and hopefully even understand the morality behind it. That's a little bit dodgier. But anyway, what we see in social media is this desire for the emotional link with no substantiation. So people say things like, well, the science has proven. It's like, no, actually, the science hasn't proven. You may actually have a contended anecdote or something like that. We'll talk about that next.
Yes.
And that itself, right, is the aspect that we have to come to. Now, again, like we said, the critic, right, offers observation, but the judgment, right, the judgment lies in the hands of the artist, right? So one of the things I think we're seeing is these unsubstantiated judgments by the critic. So in this case, one of the good things is what I've always said is the intent of the criticism is irrelevant. The information is what matters. So the individual who's the artist takes the information and, if necessary, right, can separate that from the intent. What I'll say is this. Sometimes a well-intentioned critic can be completely off base and offer something that is suspect in value, suspect in its value. Other times he can give something that is incredibly valuable, but it also has to be filtered through the skepticism of the artist. Here's the other thing, and this is something that I think there's a tremendous benefit in, but we often lose. Most times, right, the individual who has poor intent, right, is trying to just be derisive or some other mechanism.
Or be insulting.
Right, exactly. But the point is, that is usually just garbage. But however, if we understand that we can separate the information, what we'll find is sometimes, and this is a kind of really beautiful irony, is one of the things that a lot of times weak people will attack weak people, and they will think that since other people are weak, they will even attack strong people by using what they see as truth. So in fact, one of the great things is some of your worst enemies will offer your most valuable critics by telling things that they know are true in the attempt to emotionally harm you. However, by having access to those things, you can see things that have consequence. So the information in that case, so the other two is that you can have a person who basically offers something, but it actually has value, right? So just as a just as a kind of as a general overrule.
Time's getting late, and I wanted to segue from what you said, which was really an excellent point. No, it was an excellent point, but I don't
this is one of the foundational ideas that I've kind of had for a while. So I enjoy kind of going back to it and reiterating it. Go ahead.
Did you have anything else to say on that topic? I don't want you to.
I could talk for days about it.
Okay,
but
then
again,
I
let's
better
just
do
go
this
with let's
because
get
we're
to it.
running out of time.
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about what I term the absent lexicon. I'll say that again, it bears repetition after a sip
Those
of
in the
tea.
back.
Hmm?
For those in the back of the room.
Okay, the absent lexicon as primary hindrance to
Make sure they understand that's not like a little Irish guy with a pot of gold.
Okay.
I thought that was funny.
It was funny,
Yeah,
Puddle. I
okay.
really want to start without interruption, if I may,
Okay.
sweet pea. Don't want to squelch your enthusiasm.
Okay.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Gonna poke you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try this again. The absent lexicon as primary hindrance to present day criticism. As the majority of the present human population neither reads, researches, studies, or contemplates much of anything in the fast moving, swiping through one social media post every literally half second, they are taking in nothing, nor any discipline with any rigor, curiosity, or patience. They have not cultivated, formed, built, or developed even the most rudimentary lexicon on any topic or subject, field of study, or discipline. The result of which the average person is ill-equipped to pass judgment, to proclaim, to bellow their baseless opinions, to disparage or even praise, because such cultivated pursuits as drawing, painting, writing, scientific research, classical music, people will say, I love this and I hate this. We actually watch people at the Met who don't even read a single sign. They don't even know what they are looking at. Just point and say, oh, that's cute. Oh, I totally hate that. Oh, I love this. And they'll just move on and they'll do this in the gallery. And I see this over and over where they have no visual vocabulary, meaning they don't even possess any of the terms or words necessary to eloquently talk about anything that they are making a judgment on. So these are spurious, specious, false judgments, and they say them very loudly. And I find that people who have very, very little to say are often the loudest. So I will just say they don't possess the lexicon necessary to describe, frame, bookend, understand, or analyze these very areas of study of intellect and imagination driven pursuits. That's what I want to say about that.
Agreed. And I think one of the things that happens here is that people are offered the opportunity to engage socially, which for the most part was limited in most people's lives. Until social media, no one basically had the ability to reach large audiences just by simply clicking a button.
Mm-hmm.
So not completely unfairly, to judge, but I mean, a lot of people were ill-equipped for this, but the attention seeking was something that basically kind of came around. Now, since a lot of people had the same frailty, it became a crisis before we really could uncover it. There's emotional frailty and emotional fragility to a lot of people that comes from the fact that they are not used to the idea of receiving criticism. Now, the reality is, one of the things I feel is, and I've been very clear about this, I believe the greatest form of respect that one can ever pay as an observer or a critic to an artist is to offer criticism.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a professor, I felt that one of the greatest responsibility was to be able to discern that which was ultimately most necessary. And I felt that critic should strive for his ultimate vocational trait should be that ability to discern that which was most of consequence in that which was under scrutiny. And I strove to make that a very much a part of the way of which I engaged myself and kind of, purported myself. I still believe that's true. But what was ironic was I saw this value, but I saw it was somewhat kind of irritating to anyone who I engaged with, even those people who were my closest colleagues.
I'd say especially those people who are your closest colleagues, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
I
what I
mean,
did was
I
I
don't
kind
want to
of, yeah,
overstate
no,
that,
no, no,
but
that was true. But I think
yeah,
that
I
what
mean,
happened was, we have kind of gotten ourselves in a position where, just the same way that for a child, children can have very eager imaginations, but children have a sense of kind of self-satisfaction that is really something that, over with time and maturity, they overcome as they realize their maturity, cannot really enhance without kind of removing that barrier. But there were a lot of people who wanted to be told something that they wanted to hear. So I, came across this idea that there are things you need to say, and there are things that people want to hear, and
mm,
it's often a wide gap.
it's a chasm.
It can be a chasm, and it's become. And the thing is,
Yeah.
I expected that in the public realm and the social realm, but what was really staggering to me as a young academic was how much it was pervasive in the academic environment. Now, in my own field
Hmm.
of architecture, what I've noticed in the time from when I was in school in the 1980s to when I was a critic in the 1980s and 1990s to now, is the sensitivity has only grown. And remember kind of some of our recent kind of forays back into the critical engagement activity has been the fact that you have to coddle people, you have to stroke people, and you have to start
You have
with,
to walk on
you
eggshells. You
really
really
do. And it's
do.
like
It's
I
pretty excruciating.
don't see the benefit. And in fact, I don't believe there is a benefit. But I think this is part of that concern of the potential for the loss of criticism.
Yes, yes.
And I've even seen it. In fact, I was on a panel discussion in this school in the United Kingdom,
Hmm.
in 1990, and I
Hmm.
remember kind of like there was this talk about criticism as a kind of an antiquated kind of aspect, and that people were foregoing final reviews for what they called openings, as if
Ah,
similar to a kind of gallery opening.
like an
And I
exhibition.
thought,
Yeah.
the great thing about a gallery opening is a place where people who have mastered a certain craft are basically displaying their work to an educated
Hmm.
group of people. That's not really true, but that's what they
Well,
pretend it to
yeah.
be. But that's less of the
Hmm.
case in a school environment,
Hmm.
because these are people who are still learning this, and they're not really in a situation where they're ready to kind of be able to not be kind of somewhat shepherded.
Hmm.
So I remember saying that I felt that that criticism was not some kind of sentimental thing, that it's a critical aspect. It's a vital, fundamental aspect of what we do. And it was absolutely essential. And to get rid of it is to basically cut ourselves off at the knees. Anyway, so with that said,
Would you
P,
like me to leap to something real fun?
of course.
Okay, this is so much fun. Okay, there is a deeply self critical character that was invented by both the Dutch and the Germans. Now, the Germans are renowned for their puckish sense of humor. I'm
and
just
they're
kidding.
and they're fun loving,
And their
fun loving behavior.
fun loving, whimsical
Yeah.
nature.
So
They are not.
there's
But the Dutch are actually. So I would
much
like
more
to,
so.
yes, I'd like to bring up a character who fits perfectly the idea of self criticism as part of a broader societal, very lucid self reflection. The character of Hans Wurst.
Hmm.
If are you familiar with him?
No.
You're gonna love this. Okay. So I'm going to say that and then frame Hans Wurst with sauerkraut and mustard. No,
Oh,
no,
I was
but
going to frame him with the Monty
with the
Python.
bun. Oh well. Anyway, you can in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an unerring Dutch capacity for quite lucid, unwavering self criticism, often manifesting as ribald, humorous self deprecation. And this is hilarious. It is both food humor, art humor and societal humor. So, the perfect example of self reflection and criticism, what I term auto observation.
Hmm.
That is
Oh, I like that.
my original term. I will say it again. Auto observation, which is truly biting, critical, self-focused satire. So there is a great painting by the classic Dutch painter Jan Steen, Steen, who was from Leiden in the Netherlands, 1636 to 1679. For those of you who want to look him up, everybody should.
Mm-hmm.
And the painting is called Merry Company on a Terrace, circa 1670. It is currently hanging in the Masters Galleries at the Met. Go and see it. And the reason is that, and we do, is Steen excelled at creating and painting self-deprecating, highly critical, satirical paintings of his own life, specifically his unruly, unbridled, and chaotic household to this day. Okay, you're not going to believe this is absolutely true. To this very day, in the Netherlands, okay, a household by Jan Steen, that phrase has remained synonymous with and is proverbial for disorder and domestic chaos. And it is still in use from the 1600s. That is how relevant it is. And that is how intellectual and scholarly the Dutch are. I mean, it's quite amazing that people now in the Netherlands use and recognize a phrase that was born, hatched, and cultivated in the 1600s. I think that's great.
It is. And in fact, one of the things I was going to follow it up. You done?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I have one more thing because I promised Hans Wurst. Okay. Where does Hans? One of the characters in this painting, it shows Jan Steen half drunk with a hat over his eyes. His wife has a glass of wine that's fallen out of her hand. A dog is eating their supper. There is the character of Hans Wurst, who actually wore a string of sausages. And he is half adult and half of a cunning man. He's mostly stupid, somewhat of a coward, self-indulgent. He's merry, and he was a buffoon. And he is a repeating character in Franz Hall's paintings, Jan Steen paintings, German art. And he's the perfect societal criticism and critic and avatar for criticism.
That's brilliant. And I think if we think about the great comics, and again, by the great comics, the greatest comics of all time, the Marx Brothers, absolutely. And the second group, I would say, would certainly be the Python troupe.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I think that the Marx Brothers did brilliantly was basically kind of critique very clearly and humorously,
yes,
the aspect of society in which they existed.
Groucho, Harpo, Chico.
I think that they exposed the corruption, they exposed the chaos, they exposed all the incredible pomposity. I mean,
and war. That absolutely was duck
exactly.
Soup.
But I mean, I think they exposed the kind of almost absurdity of culture in a way that was kind of, we talked about this in terms of sarcasm. Sarcasm and humor is the best way to test a character. If an individual cannot handle sarcasm, cannot handle humor, that person basically, I would say, disqualifies themselves from credibility. What I was going to say about the Python group was they really understood the fact at the collapse of empire, which was where the British, where the crown was at this time, they were able to kind of look upon with things like the upper class twit of the year and kind of things like that, and see the fact that it was necessary to have this healthy skepticism, to have this sarcasm, to be biting in your criticism so you understand and appreciate your reality and don't waver from it. What we have done and we do now in society is we have completely lost the ability to critique people in terms of sarcasm, in terms of irony. And it's because, again, we have grown far too emotionally frail.
And no one was better at mocking the British class system than Monty Python.
Yeah.
I mean, you were just mired in
the upper class tweet of the year is one of the most profound kind of sketches, that ever was seen. The idea of the promotion of the malevolent imbecile to point where it became self-destructive. This was
it sucked up everyone around.
This is what was very clearly at the death of empire.
Yeah.
And what happened, and this is what I fear, is that as Britain has fallen and now continues to fall, what happened was the inability to sustain that healthy sarcasm and skepticism and irony has given way to chaos. And now all you have is this rancorous, malevolent kind of like desire of two opposing groups who see themselves in a kind of like war against each other and only want to kind of decimate each other. And it's really pathetic to watch.
No, I agree.
This is kind of get to the point where it's become incredibly unhealthy, and all you have is this kind of derisive kind of like name calling and kind of suspicion. And I don't see a solution. And it makes me really sad because, I mean, again, what was a great people has now kind of succumbed to just becoming just a quagmire. And I mean, I see the possibilities of this kind of infecting my own country, and I see that the roots are already here. Anyway, so as we wrap up here in the last couple of, well, we still have like 9 minutes, but anyway, we're kind of getting moving on. So the next week, we're kind of talking about the concern for criticism, which is actually an extension of this, but we'll take more of a kind of sense of, why we need, like not so much the loss or the potential loss, but why it's essential to retain this. We've kind of started to talk a little bit about that, but we'll talk more about that in general. So,
true. Well, thank you. I will save my information on Lawrence Stern for the next time because it's very involved. But I believe I can briefly say, because this is very, very topical, to quickly bring up the harsh and subjective condemnation of critical sources. And this is very key, meaning who is actually, quote unquote, allowed to be critical, what social station or professional approval stamp will be sanctioned, meaning be allowed to speak, write, or act critically in the opaque eyes of society. So all too often, what I call cantilevered personal or reduced professional circumstances hamper the vital activities and self-expression of the critical mind, the empirical thinker. Conversely, nepotism, legacy, positions, inherited wealth, title, and proxied power have bestowed a wholly unworthy entitlement upon the imbecilic, the resentful, the unqualified, the ignorant, the superstitious, and the superficial puppet, in whose malicious claws true criticism is morphed into derision, insult, defamation of noble character, revenge, and finally wielded as a tool of embitterment. And that is where I will end this.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see is that the fact that
there.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's brilliant. Because the reality is, and I'm writing this down for next week because I want to start with that story about the studio when I was a teacher.
Oh, yes, that's a perfect story.
Because I think that's very true.
Yeah, yes, it is.
I think one of the things that was a precursor and the antidote is social media. is that prior to the explosion of social media, like the reality of record producing in the 80s, was the fact that pretty much everything was controlled by a few people, rather than there being this kind of democratic kind of society where people had the ability to judge for themselves. For the most part, writing, art, science was controlled by institutions. And as a result, it was kind of stifling itself off. And I'd say the analogy was similar to that of, say, the music industry. In the music industry in the 70s, there was like 7 bands.
Yeah.
And they all sucked. And the reality was
heavily promoted, advertised.
Yes, exactly.
Shoved down our throats.
And they sucked.
Yeah, they were.
But the point is, that's all there was.
Yeah.
Now, the idea was in the 80s, when the production of music became so much more accessible to the individual, what happened was there was an explosion of musical taste. And as a result, anyone who wanted to produce music could make music. And 99% of it was just absolute shit. But as a result, we had the bad brains, right? And as a result, we had some of these things that were basically such that they could have never existed any other way. I mean, that to me was brilliant. The potential for social media is the fact that there is a bad brains somewhere other places.
Sure.
Not because they're doing anything other than just doing what they believe is necessary, and it has consequence. So the reality is, part of the way of overcoming that stifling kind of oppression of institutions was the fact that anyone can get out and produce work. Here's the problem. The people, right, are not as discerning as they should have been, because previous generations took away their ability to believe that they had the right to be discerning. And that's key. Every individual has the right to be discerning, not make judgments.
Yeah.
Because it's the difference.
They don't know the difference.
It's the difference between having the right to having free speech and having something to fucking say.
Yeah.
That's a crucial difference. Yeah. Everyone has the right to babble whatever the fuck they want. But the point is, the ability to have the discernment such that one can say something of consequence, that has been taken away because we didn't exercise that muscle. So what will allow us as a society to move forward is to emancipate the individual to be able to discern consequence. I'm going to leave it there.
And I will say that the Marx Brothers, A Night at the Opera, the funniest film ever made. The idea of discerning consequence in the realm of something as effete as the opera is dismantled beautifully. It is taken apart, rung by rung by rung. And if you ever want to see the funniest scene ever filmed, the stateroom scene on board the ship, where they are stowaways because they are not even given the chance to sail with the opera company because they don't have the status, but they actually have the most talented opera singer with them as their stowaway. So with that said, and I will save some of my notes.
So next week, we're going to talk about the concern for criticism, which basically kind of says, all right, why is it that we're concerned? Why is it? We've made the point, I think, quite clearly that there is an unspeakable crisis here. And now we've kind of identified it, and now we'll talk about why.
Yes, because the why holds the fascination.
Right. Okay. And so the realm of ideas is free to all. And this is a really kind of, this is where it kind of means probably the most extended in a sense. Yeah, it really resonates in this one. The realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to keep it just that way.
Precisely.
And stay free.
Hans Wurst.